Hey there, welcome. I'm Damien and I'm just starting artist on the internet. I'm making this convention vlog a little differently than the ones I've been doing until now. Keep in mind that this will be my last convention vlog as a seller, at least for a couple of years, since I'm not going to be tabling at any events for that time. In this video I'm covering all the conventions I did during the second half of 2024, which are Hyper Japan in London in July, VTuber Expo in Birmingham in August, and MCM London Comic Con in October. Honestly, I didn't think I had enough to say about them for me to justify a whole video for each one of them. As I was reviewing the footage from all of this, I realized that I was basically making the same video I have already made. I have already discussed in all of my previous vlogs how difficult it has become for me to make any profit at these events, over and over and over. I don't enjoy being so repetitive, and you, my viewer, deserve better than me wasting your time with the same stuff I've already told you. So instead I'm just going to compare the three events. Starting with the venue and general organization. Hyper Japan took place at its usual venue, London Olympia. There's 2 halls and 2 floors per hall. The ground floor of the entrance hall was practically empty and entirely unutilized for some reason. It was that way last year too. However, the top floors were better organized in my opinion. There's not really a distinction between artist and dealer tables. There are 2 tiers of tables, which they call Exhibitor and Fringe Area tables. You can think of the Fringe Area as the equivalent of Artist Alley. I was in the Exhibitor hall, however, because the Fringe tables are just a bit too small for me. So I get the more expensive Exhibitor tables because they're bigger, and we get 2 of them. All of these are on the top floor, by the way. The bottom floor is reserved for sponsors, much bigger businesses, food stalls, and the stage. I didn't really hear of anyone having any major complaints about the organization, but there was one big problem that the organizers just couldn't really do anything about, honestly. Not after the event had already started anyways. The food stalls downstairs were moved closer to the balcony of the top floor compared to last year, and some of us that were selling acrylic products like keychains or badges started to see droplets of grease condensation forming on top of their displays. Not to mention products made with fabric that just soaked in all that food smell. I was not near the food stall, so I didn't experience that myself, but I had a completely different issue. I was right on top of the stage. Just listen to this. So yeah, they improved some things, and a few other things got a bit worse from last year, so kind of the same overall. Now, VTuber Expo. The information available before the convention was very confusing. It was a first-time event, and it took place at the Birmingham NEC, which is not really something to be excited about from my experience. I have never had a good event in there. Add the fact that I know nothing about VTubers, and I don't have any merch related to them, and my long streak of bad events, and my expectations were abysmally low. Well, I was wrong. Best event I did that year. I'm not being sarcastic, it actually was. This will be on the top of my list of events to apply for when I eventually come back. It was a very small convention compared to most other ones I've done, but the crowd was very, very engaged, which is something I have been missing at these kinds of events. I feel like VTuber fans are a more niche, dedicated audience when compared to the usual anime and comic fans, especially now that those have become somewhat mainstream in a way. If you think of VTubers as someone's original character, it makes sense that this audience will be more interested in engaging with original content from independent creators, and also interacting with those creators. I also have absolutely nothing to criticize the organizers for. As said before, the information available before the event was very confusing, but as soon as I showed up, I asked a few things, and everything made sense. Everything had been thought and prepared perfectly. And if I needed anything, I knew where to find help. There were 2 stages that, in an event of this size, would have normally been a problem, but they were blocked out by curtains and not really that loud either, so no complaints at all. The layout just made sense for what they were trying to do. MCM London was just, I don't know, MCM London. It took place at the ExCeL near London Airport, same venue it has been taking place for I don't know how long, in 2 absolutely massive halls, each one at both sides at the main boulevard within the ExCeL. The gaming area that MCM usually has was expanded this year and turned into EGX. EGX is a different gaming event that normally happens a few months before MCM, in the same venue. Since they're both run by Readbop, it seems like they decided to combine them together. Why they did this? This is a bit of a speculation. I have no solid evidence, but I think it's just not viable to run EGX on its own anymore. Gaming events like E3 and Insomnia are dying left and right. And with the constantly increasing price to rent out this specific venue, it just doesn't make sense to keep running it as its own event. But that's just my opinion, and I think this merging may have actually harmed MCM. I will come back to that point eventually later. This was the only one out of these three where I was in Artist Alley, and I think Artist Alley may have been a bit bigger than it usually was previous years, although last time I attended as a visitor was in 2021, so it may have been growing a little bit every time, as they do it twice every year. There was a stage at the back of Artist Alley where they did panels and interviews. It wasn't too loud from what I could hear, so that was alright. Besides that, layout-wise, MCM is just the most Comic-Con out of the Comic-Cons in the UK. It's a good layout, but I can't think of anything remarkable about it. It just is. Now I want to talk about the part that actually matters if you want to sell at an event like this. Venue and organization don't really matter if your audience isn't there. And when I talk about the audience, the crowd, the visitors, the attendees, whatever you want to call them, I'm talking about engagement, and that means what are they there for and what are they buying? Hyper Japan has been trying to sell itself as a Japanese culture festival since their very first edition. They're still trying, but it's 95% just AnimeCon. Because the way they try to present themselves, though, there's a weird mix of people coming to the event. For example, there will be a fair amount of families that are actually interested in the cultural side of Hyper Japan. Some of them even Japanese families themselves. They just don't buy stuff from artists. There might be some that do, but you can't rely on that crowd to make any significant sales. Most of the people will be the usual anime and manga fans, cosplayers, and so on. From what I could see, they tend to be more on the younger side and are less likely to engage with original art. Let me remind you that I do not sell fan art at all. I only work with my own IPs, unless it's a commission or something. I sold the first 3 of my hand-drawn Shikishi boards, which I could not sell any at all during Dokomi, and the top selling items were small prints and acrylic keychains. I made about 80% of my expenses back, but I got the bigger, more expensive table, so not the worst convention I've done, but this was my 3rd time doing it, and it has been getting a bit worse each time, so I am very reluctant to come back at all, if I'm completely honest. VTuber Expo was great. I was not expecting it. I already talked a bit about the crowd earlier, very dedicated, very engaged. Also big spenders. I did not make a lot of sales, but most of them were relatively large purchases. I sold about 10 of my Shikishi boards, and a lot of people stopped to ask about my Mysterious Manor project that I'm working on at the moment. I don't think I had any top selling products, honestly. I sold a bit of everything more or less equally, with the exception of my largest A3 prints. Everything else was selling quite well. This was the only event in 2024 where I made a profit, despite not having any VTuber related products. Everything else I either broke even or lost money, and that's spoilers for MCM in a bit. This was also a very good event for networking if you're interested in doing any work related to VTubers. Now for MCM, it's the biggest convention in the UK, and it's commonly said that there is so many people attending that you will certainly find your audience, because everyone from every fandom is here. Well, allow me to call bullshit. That may have been the case at some point, but I don't think it is anymore. Normally, the venue a convention is held at will limit the amount of tickets that can be sold for safety reasons. In case of an emergency, you don't want so many people that a potential evacuation becomes riskier than whatever the emergency was. I don't know if the number of people allowed at a time has been reduced or something, but organizers keep claiming to have sold tickets out, and the events just feel empty. Of course, it wasn't really empty, but it was not MCM level full from what I've seen in previous editions. I also mentioned that this year MCM was merged with EGX earlier, and from what I have seen myself and heard from artists and traders that I have talked to, the people that attend gaming events don't really buy things. I am usually an example of an artist that is on the lower end of profit when trading at conventions, so my numbers are not very optimistic in general. But even talking with other artists, this edition of MCM was just weird. Most people performed way below what they were expecting. My expenses for this one were overall the same as for Hyper Japan, and I managed to barely make just that much back. I sold 2 more of my Shikishi boards, and the top selling items were postcards and small prints, followed very closely by acrylic keychains. Now for the rest of the video, I want to talk about my decision to stop selling at conventions. For now, I will come back to them, but depending on how things go when I eventually decide to come back, it could potentially be a permanent decision. And I fear that the chances of that happening are actually very, very high. I started selling at conventions as soon as we were allowed to run events like this again after COVID, during the second half of 2021. Ever since, I've done 7 to 10 events every year. And at the beginning, it was good. It was good. I made enough profits to be able to reinvest in doing more events and being better at them. I managed to buy a professional printer. I bought equipment and stuff to experiment with different setups. I tried new products, and of course I managed to afford the always increasing prices for the tables. I can only assume that it was because everyone was coming out of lockdown. Everyone was somewhat desperate to engage with each other in person. We all wanted some sense of normalcy back in some way. And maybe spending money at Comic-Con was a way to feel normal again for some people. I was also very forgiving of some organizers because I was doing all right at their events. But now conventions feel empty. And the very few people that show up they're not spending money, they're not really buying anything. And organizers seem to have forgotten how to run events. They're just not that good anymore, at least in the UK. I'm just one small artist with a small voice here on this platform on YouTube. But I don't see anyone else speaking for those that, like me, are being forced to give up because it just isn't happening. Seeing all the success stories from other artists that do great at conventions, it can be very frustrating if that's not you. I kept asking for advice, trying different setups and ways to display my table. You have to try all the events that you can to find your audience. Well, I tried them all. I tried them all, and my audience is just not there. Don't get me wrong. I really appreciate each one of you that stops at my table, that buys my work and asks me about my projects, follows me on social media, and even those of you that do absolutely nothing but just very shyly tell me that my art looks great before you scurry away in the crowd again. I am extremely thankful to each one of you. But there's just not enough of you. At least not at conventions. And you're doing everything right, and it can sometimes feel like you're just not good enough. I know it kind of sounds like I'm giving up on art altogether. Don't worry, I will keep being an artist. I'm working on stuff. I'm developing a game called Mysterious Manor, and I'm about to start working on a manga that is connected to the game as well. I already have so many ideas for what I want to do after I'm done with those projects. I've never really had an issue coming up with ideas. With conventions out of the picture, now I have a lot more time to focus on those projects. As complicated as my relationship with art may be, I will forever be an artist. I simply cannot stop now. As for being a convention artist, I don't know what things will look like in the future, but right now, if you're considering starting to trade at conventions as an artist, I cannot honestly recommend it. I have no idea what it may be like in other places, but if you do exclusively original art in the UK, you may find yourself in the same situation I'm in right now. Feel free to try, but be aware that it is a massive gamble. And well, things got a bit too real there. But if you want to help, if you find anything of what I do and say helpful at all, or you just like my work, please, by the time this video is up, I will have reorganized my shop, and everything in there will only last until all my stock is gone. I will eventually put new things, but what's in there right now will not be restocked again. And that just sounds like I'm begging now after everything I've said. You don't have to. A like and a subscribe will be more than enough if I'm completely honest. Leave a comment as well if you have any questions or have anything to add that you think I missed. And there will be a link down in the description where you can find all my social media, as well as my shop. It will be in the same link. And I think that's all I have to say for now. I hope you found this video helpful and insightful, even if only a little. So keep drawing, keep getting better, and I will see you next time.